Jackie from AlchemicalCosplay with a tutorial on how to make this reversible crossbody bag. While we're social distancing, this is a great bag to use up some materials in your stash. There's a downloadable free link in the description. You can print it out and it's a one size deal, but there's different pocket options that you can choose. Bottom weight materials will work best like a denim or canvas, or if you want to use cotton, I'd suggest interfacing it so it's a little bit stronger. It's got a bias binding, a double fold bias binding, and a lining and a shell, so you can play with patterns, colors, and materials to use up whatever you've got lying around. This used to be kitchen curtains, and this I bought at a convention, and it's a vintage Japanese obi. I didn't know what I was going to do with it, but I liked it. I'm sure none of you have ever done anything like that, but in case you do and want to use up some of your stash, this is a great project to do that with. It's a nice lightweight medium-sized bag for when we can go out into the world again, or if you want to carry snacks around the house and you don't have pockets in your pajamas, you could carry this. So let's get to the tutorial and I'll show you how I made it. Step 1. Cut and prep your pattern pieces and materials. An important note, unlike the garment pattern, we are not cutting mirrored front and back pieces. The shell material pieces and the lining pieces should look exactly the same. So if your fabric has a distinct front and back side like this Japanese fabric, do not fold your fabric in half and cut both pieces at the same time. You want to cut both the shell and the lining with the pattern up so that you have the right side of your fabric in the right places. Next, you'll want to mark on your patterns, your pocket placements, and the dart placements on both the shell pieces and the lining pieces. You will need about 2.5 yards of double fold bias tape that finishes at about 1/2 inch, and also 24 inches of cord that will be cut into two 12-inch pieces. You should prepare your pocket pieces now. These are for the welt pocket going on the exterior of the bag. And these are for the center divider pocket. There are 4 pieces of the pocketing and a nylon coil zip, which I'll cut to 10 inches for the interior. Once all your materials and pattern pieces are prepared, the first thing you'll want to sew are the exterior pockets that you want to add to the bag. There are 2 choices with this pattern, a welt pocket and a patch pocket. I decided to put the welt pocket on the bag that I'm sewing for this demo. I'm not going to get into detail on how to sew a welt pocket because that would be a tutorial all on its own, but I'll put a link to a great welt pocket tutorial in the pattern so you can reference it as needed. For the zipper on the center divider pocket, I secured the end by sewing a piece of bias binding across it and back stitching across the coil. This finishes it nicely and prevents the slider from falling off. When sewing the front end of the zipper, I fold a 1/2 inch of the zipper down into the seam so that when you're sewing across, you catch the zipper teeth in the seam, which will prevent the zipper from falling off on the front half. Essentially, you want to catch each side of the zipper tape between 2 layers of pocketing between the notches marked on the pattern. The zipper will start 1 inch in from each end of the center divider pocket so that it won't get in the way when you're sewing the bias binding around the bag later. You'll fold the pocket in half along the zipper and then stay stitched within the seam allowance around the edge just to keep everything in place when you're adding the pocket to the bag later. Next, sew the darts into the shell and lining pieces, and remember, But if your fabric does not have a distinct front and back to it, you want your pattern pieces for the shell and the lining to be facing the same direction and not mirrored. Pay careful attention or you'll end up ripping out some darts later. Once you have all your pockets and darts sewn up, you can stack your shell and lining pattern pieces. They'll be wrong sides together. Then you will pin baste and stay stitch around the lower half of the pattern. You will not want to stay stitch the edges of the straps because you need to sew the seam at the top, alternating the shell and the lining, which I'll explain more in just a second. After you've stay stitched the bottom edges to secure the lining and shell of each half, insert the center zip divider pocket between the pieces. You'll want to stay stitch around the bottom yet again, trapping the pocket between the two layers and securing everything together. Leave about 1.5 inches free at the corner of the pattern so your bias binding will have a clean finish. I'll explain this more in just a bit. And now is the best time to sew that top seam. So here I am doing right sides of shell and the lining piece together. Here it is all sewn. Here is how the top seam should look, alternating shell and lining. Find the top center of the bag where the front and back halves intersect, and then attach your cord with a zigzag tack stitch at the top edge. The last step on this project is to add the bias binding to the inner and outer edges. Now this is what I mean by the inner edge. You start at the corner and go around to the other corner on the back of the bag. The second section of bias binding will start at the bottom and go around the outer edge all the way up over the strap and down again to the center bottom. And this is why we didn't stay stitch all the way around and left 1.5 inches open earlier, so we can get our bias binding all the way to the edge here. We start by bias binding the inner edge, so the ends of this binding will be covered when we do the outside edge later. And the reason we twisted the straps so that the shell met the lining was so we could do a continual line of bias binding all the way around the inner edge to the other corner on the back of the bag. And the final step is to sew bias binding around the outer edge, starting at the center bottom and going to the outside of the bag, catching all layers and covering all your stay stitches so your bag finishes really cleanly.